Hola Flamingos. This is episode. What's the episode now? 4, I think, of Holy Flamingo Poop. And I am your host, Andrew Mark Rowe. This is the mid-month episode. I'm recording this on April 13th to be released on Good Friday, April 15th. And the focus this month is going to be on the launch of book 3 of the Thoth Quadrilogy called Kiss of the Scarab, a Ghost Story. And this is kind of an interesting series. It's really kind of messed up, to be honest with you, and I think it's a good way. Some people seem to agree with me. It's on its face, it was quite like I started writing it during 2020 during the pandemic, and I've already got the first draft of the last book done, so the series is going to be finished pretty soon, by the summertime sometime, I think. It's a first person story narrated by Thoth. The first book is called The Weighing of the Heart, a cautionary tale. The second book is The Great Feather Caper, a divine send-up. And it's one of the... I wrote this one while I was going through some stuff. I mean, everybody kind of went through some stuff during the pandemic, I think, is easy to say. And it's at the end of the pandemic now. Is it still going on? I mean, it's technically still going on, and we're mostly opened up here in Newfoundland where I live. But the general tone of the story is kind of it's about an apocalypse, and it's set off by Seth, the god of darkness in Egyptian mythology. It's all ancient Egyptian mythology. But again, it's narrated by Thoth, and there's some weird stuff that happens in it. It's pretty... the venereal zombie apocalypse is what Dennis Liggio called it. And there's a lot of stuff in there about... a whole bunch of it's Thoth, so there's kind of like an alchemy twist to it. Thoth being the esoteric, one of the esoteric great lords. I think a lot of like Western occult stuff came out of the the cult, the Thoth cult. Who he was Hermes Trismegistus, I think, was the guy who wrote the Emerald Tablet, which was seen as one of these ancient holy texts, and it's kind of it's all about self-realization, but it's coming at it from this really bizarre, symbolic Western way of looking at this stuff. I mean, it's there's definitely quite a bit, like all my work, there's quite a bit of philosophy in it, and this one is very existential. I mean, it's all my stuff is to some degree existential, but this one's very much so. Maybe not quite as much as the Yoga of Strength or the Yoga Trilogy, but it's in there. But it's also extremely comedic, and it pokes fun of a lot of stuff. Sexuality being a big one. Sexuality itself. One of the main characters, like the whole way that this plague gets transmitted is through snakes that come out of people's crotches and bite the asses of their victims and drain them and turn them into mummies. It's that's one of the plagues. There's several plagues. It's kind of this is book 3, and there's several. There's like one that's turns pubic lice into these massive crabs that are kind of like alien, like crabs from or face huggers from Aliens, and turns people into fiends for turns men into fiends for getting their balls mashed, because that's what one of the gods is into. I write this stuff and I'm like, this is, I when I'm falling out of my chair laughing at it, it's, I kind of feel that I've got something decent going on there. And it's not for everybody. I mean, some people read this stuff and they're just completely turned off by it. Some people love it. It's the nature of comedy, I think, and writing generally, the art appreciation. But, I'm grinning like a bitch fox, as my grandmother used to say right now, which kind of tells you how I feel about it. It's very psychological in that I was going through and working through some stuff, through my own psyche, which is, I've heard somewhere that being an author is like going through therapy publicly and getting paid for it, which this one kind of was definitely part of it. There was definitely therapy that was sought during it too. This pandemic was really put a strain on me and everybody else. It's kind of that's one of the uniting things of this pandemic, I think, is that nobody was alone in the shit show. Everybody, even though you felt alone, like I felt quite alone. And there was some stuff that went on that was kind of crazy, crazier than normal. My life, it tends to be pretty crazy, at least internally. Yeah. So the book, The Kiss of the Scarab, a ghost story. So this one comes in after The Great Feather Caper. I mean, it's very much like, I don't know, like I wrote my first book that I wrote, The Yoga of Strength, followed the hero's journey to a T. And a lot of, if you get an author's guidebook, and if you get like stuff, like a lot of editors, and this is just my interpretation, so I'm not going to say this is kind of like a everybody does it type of thing. But if you go to like let's say a big publisher, their main concern is to get something published is they want to make sure that what you've got is saleable. That's my understanding. I mean, they're looking to sell to you, right? So, or sell to the public. And so they edit with that kind of thing in mind, and they write like the stories, they follow a structure, and it's called the hero's journey to some degree. But I mean, that's, especially with genre fiction, the fantasy genre especially. I mean, this is what fantasy is taking over, I think, was the role of mythology. And like mythology is like, there's so much I can say about it, but I mean, that's what this is. This book is mythology. It's a form of mythology. It's, mythology is this stuff that's continually being written. And if you want to look at it in terms of like the Jungian great unconscious, or the collective unconscious, or whatever, it's kind of a transmission of that kind of thing. And this is why it kind of gets wrapped up in ideas of religion, and there's it speaks to something deep within us, which it's a lot of religious stories are mythology. The story of Jesus is a myth. It's, they get you called a heretic, but I mean, that's what it is really, at its root. At least that's the way I've experienced it. The adherence to this idea that it was like a literal story of a man, and this guy was some sort of God who came down to kind of, be our, save us from our sins and all that stuff. One of the things Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which was a book that took mythologies from around the world and kind of tried to figure out what the commonalities were. He said that all religions are true, but none are literal. And I mean, that's kind of, vague and difficult to talk about, but I mean, that's the reality of this stuff, about being, is that it is to some degree ineffable. And that's kind of like the what it's about. Like that's part of the game. If you want to look at life as like a game, that's part of it. One of the things that Ursula K. Le Guin said in her preface to a fantastic book called The Left Hand of Darkness, which is very philosophical in its own way. What she said was essentially, and this is like trite, I mean, everyone's heard it, but it's like the fiction or the lies we tell to tell the truth. And like she said, like, I consider myself an atheist, but, you know, I'm using gods to talk about this stuff. And it's like, you know, you gotta accept my hypocrisy or my paradoxical way of talking about this stuff, which is exactly what that stuff is all about. I mean, when I was younger, I kind of had like surface understandings of stuff. And I mean, they were perfect understandings in their own way, but that's what they were. And I mean, I still got surface understandings of stuff, but I feel like I might have scratched the surface a little deeper on some things. But, you know, this is something for all of us to discover, which is what mythology is all about. It kind of helps lead us down the path of our own lives. That's where the value for storytelling comes into play. As far as I'm, you know, like, it's one thing to hear a story about somebody else doing something exciting and awesome, but to be able to live your own life in that way, which is to some degree a matter of perspective. You know, it's life, like from the outside. Like one of the things Campbell said is about these realizations that you have from following your bliss, is how we put it, or like going through your life according to you know, what might be called, like, I don't know, an exciting way of living or something like that. Is that like the world around you doesn't really change, but the internal interpretation of the world changes. And this is like the birth of art, comes through these experiences, like the birth of the creator, like God, quote unquote, God is the creator. It's not like you can look at that as like some, you know, from a cosmological sense, which is the way it's taught. Like, yeah, God like pulled the mountains out of the ground and did all this stuff that we call the world, but it also, you know, it's also the force that drives change, and creation being like one of these things where like order comes out of the chaos. And that's, you know, I'm kind of rambling, and it's not, again, I know I'm not doing it justice, and I don't think anyone should listen to anything I'm saying and take it seriously. You know, it works for me. And that's what the weird thing about art is that, you know, again, Joseph Campbell said something along the lines of, like when he was trying to define mythology, he said, dreams are private myths and myths are public dreams. Like anything you read or any stuff that comes into you is some person's interpretation of reality, and it's partly their own, you know, half of it is them writing something down or communicating or whatever, and the other half is your own perception based on your own experiences, your own everything. And that's kind of like the myth and the things that make us, you know, make our hackles our eyes and make us really feel connected and alive. You know, there's a gap, or there's a gap that is bridged. And so, you know, like a lot of the the books that I'm writing kind of get into the nature of reality in that way. And you know, Thoth is kind of like talking about this kind of stuff, and the other gods are talking about it, and the other people are talking about it, and it's you know, it's full of this kind of stuff. I think in the first book there's some scene where Thoth throws a copy of The Hero with 1,000 Faces across the room or something. Anyways, you know, and it's kind of you know, it's tongue in cheek, and it's kind of, you know, funny. Like it makes fun a bit of the well, it makes fun a lot of like pretty much everything, like takes the piss out of everything, which is kind of the way I like to do things, you know, like, you know, the world at large takes itself very seriously. I mean, my world gets serious Exhibit A being having a terrible mental health breakdown during the pandemic, but laughter is a resolution of that seriousness and anxiety, and that's why I love comedy so much. One of the things that is not super, it's there's no more king and there's no more jester the way that it used to be, where there was truth spoken to power to as like a regular thing. Like now things are different, but that like archetype of that, because it's almost like everybody's playing their roles, and every once in a while we kind of have to take a little break and have a laugh about the whole thing, right? I mean, we're all terminal. We're all coming out of the ground and going back into it. We're coming out of the world and going back in. Like, it's a kind of a thing where you can look at it from two perspectives. You can have like a bleak, pessimistic, ugly way of looking at it, where it's there's life is meaningless and it's nihilistic and it's all this kind of stuff. But there's also you can take it very seriously and think that life is the most important thing, and with it, what we do in this life is the most, it's all super important, it's super serious and all that stuff. But there's also this kind of, middle ground is the way of looking at it, but kind of recognizing that this is just a bit of fun, and we're going from the cradle to the grave, and we're doing all this stuff in between, but we can't forget to have a laugh, which is what I think comedy is so important as part of this. It's I say, like, facetiousness is next to godliness. That's what I have as my Facebook description, which is kind of, I think it's pretty good, and whether or not that's true or not. But yeah, so a lot of these mythological elements come out in the book, and it's fun. It's I'm writing my current project that I'm writing is the third Bodyguard book, which is fucked. It's like every book is kind of like, it's got its own flavor, and this one is like, it takes the sexuality element and just like lampoons the shit out of it, more so than even this one, the Thoth Quadrilogy, because the Thoth Quadrilogy does get a fair bit into some heavy, and there's always like going from the heavy stuff to the not to the light stuff. Like, there's a constant going around and back. But I mean, that's kind of like the oscillation of that is the way life works to some degree, and that's what I want to do with my writing. Like, I'd love to hit it big and have like a lot of like people who are super into my stuff and like all that stuff. Like, I'd love for that to be the case, but I don't know if that is going to happen, or if it will ever happen, or whatever. Like, my main concern, like if my main concern was to make money, I would get a few books about a certain style. Like, I don't know whether it would be a detective novel or it could even be just doing another hero's journey type of story, or like adhering to that formula very closely, and then making that the books that I write. But for me, it's more important to write something that's true, which might sound uncompromising in a bad way, which maybe this is the thing, right? Like, what's the aim of what you're doing, right? For me, that's it, right? Like, I have my favorite types of work are the ones that are experimental, that push the envelope, that do all this stuff. But I still love the other kind of stuff too. But, like people say that a lot of the stuff in my books are unexpected, which is like, for me, when I get that experience, it's like first of all, when life is unexpected, that's the best thing, right? Like, we make all these plans for the future and like hope things turn out the way that we want them to be. And when they don't, we get upset and, it feel like things like there was I had some, stuff happen that kind of like, you expect things to turn out a certain way. And that was during the pandemic. That was like a big part of it, and like again, love is a big part of it. Like falling in love and, having those, like, it's so put on a pedestal in our society, like the romantic idealism type of stuff. And, part of that is like the whole fairy tale happy ever after type of thing. And, you kind of expect that life follows that pattern when you're kind of fed these stories regularly. But one of the things Campbell said is that it's not, you don't read the happy ending as like some sort of the happy ending of the fairy tale is some sort of, I can't remember the exact word they said, but it's not like something that's nonsensical. It's more about something kind of like a deeper experience of reality is, kind of being viewed in a different way, rather than there being any kind of serious differences in it. And that's kind of, this whole series, like the expectation, like, it's kind of like it's set up as it's going to be an apocalypse and there's going to be the day that's saved, and it's going to be saved in a certain way, and then that gets flipped. And that's like, that to me is like the best, which is why I write that shit. Like other authors will write things that fit very, like they'll be surprising in certain ways, but they'll still follow that basic structure where, there is the day that's saved in some way or another. The ring gets destroyed in the fires of Mordor, and the world is saved. Like that is, that is myth. That is the story. That is the traditional structure. But the thing about things is that they change as well. I was listening to somebody on one of my Facebook pages talked about how Campbell's structure wasn't, it was good, but it wasn't the whole story on human experience. And I think that that's the truth. And I think that there's always it always mutates and changes. There's certain things that are, timeless, and that's the eternal. That's the experience of the eternal. But the way that we come to those experiences, it's always changing. I mean, this is, if you want to look at the Hindu idea of like the Leela, or the playground of the gods, that's the whole point of that, is constant change, or their whole way that it functions. It can't function without differences. So if you want something that's weird, different, you probably want to read some of my stuff. You probably want to read this series, the Thoth Quadrilogy. And I think Dennis Liggio said that it's the most fucked up shit he's ever read, and he's on the internet. So there you go. I just want to mention a few things that I've reviewed since last we spoke. The Shadow Rising, which is A Wheel of Time number 4, which is fantastic. I just am loving this. Like, it's so familiar now, this story, and it's, it's enjoyable to listen to this one unfold. I think that Robert Jordan really made something special with this, which I wasn't totally sold on it initially, but he got his hooks into me. So yeah, I'd recommend the Wheel of Time books. So far, people say it gets slow and gets slow, and it loses its steam and it gets kind of boring. But I don't know. We'll see. I tend to not be all that hypercritical when I'm reading something. I try to appreciate things for what they are rather than think of how I would have done them differently or whatever. That doesn't mean that some things I just don't like, but that's generally the perspective I try to keep. H is for Hellraisin by Marc Reichal, who's a fellow humorous indie author. Now, this was fucking hilarious. I gotta say, I laughed so hard. If you've ever read or ever watched Hellraiser, the movie, it's just like this straight up parody, and it is all kinds of over the top jokes, just constant. And yeah, it's really good. Highly recommend that one. But if you never saw the movie, you might not get some of the humor. I will say that. Galaxy Cruise, The Maiden Voyage by your old pal Marcus Alexander Hart. Now, this one reminded me quite a bit of the game Space Quest, which was an old Sierra online game from the 80s. I played it when I was like a little kid, and a lot of the humor kind of went over my head, but they made like sequels, and it was like very much like a, kind of a yeah, it's not like their version of something. Like my stuff would be closer to, say, like Leisure Suit Larry, which is still kind of cheesy humor, but it's all kind of like dirty too. But this one is more of like a clean sci-fi humor, kind of like Red Dwarf, or there's some other stuff kind of like that. But yeah, but it's well written. It's good, funny. I laughed quite a bit while I was reading it. Plague of the Dreamless by J.D. Riot and Jennifer Shelby. So Jennifer is my next guest on the podcast, and we're going to be talking about her work. So that'll be April 30th. I think I'll be dropping it because Marcus's book, we're doing a newsletter swap, and I think that's the last day of his sale. But I'll be talking to Jennifer a bit more about that. But that book was great. It was another of the Cassidy Kane books, the Slipstreamers, which is a series of young adult sci-fi novellas that kind of like Indiana Jones meets Sliders, kind of. Yeah, it's good. Beast Be Gone by A.L. Billington, which is that's another really funny one. I enjoyed that quite a bit. It's like if you're a fantasy gamer type of person, you'd be into that for sure. He's having some issues with Amazon right now, which sucks. Like apparently there's some kind of a terms of service battle he's going through. I feel terrible for him because anytime you got to fight that behemoth, it's probably not going to end well. Yeah, those are all the books. So the series is going to be on sale. The whole first 3 books of the Thoth Quadrilogy. So you're going to be able to get The Weighing of the Heart for free. The Great Feather Caper for 99 cents in the U.S. See, this is the thing about this sale, is that it's Amazon's weirdness, which means when I do these like countdown sales, it's only US and UK. I think I'm going out of the Amazon exclusivity deal, which means that I'm not going to be beholden to Amazon for this stuff anymore. But I don't have. I think it might be August I'll make the switch, but it'll take me out of Kindle Unlimited. But so it's the US and UK. But if you're in the US, if you're anywhere, you'll be able to get The Weighing of the Heart for free on Kindle. Great Feather Caper, you'll be able to get that for 99 cents in the US, 99 pence in the UK. And Kiss of the Scarab, it's launching at $2.99 in the US, and the other prices are based on that. But you'll be able to. That's only for the first month or so, and then it's going up to $3.99 because normal pricing is 99 cents, $2.99, $3.99, and then the last book will be $4.99. And that's it, I think. But that sale's on from the 15th to the 19th, which is my birthday. I'll be turning 37. Holy shit. Late 30s now. No longer mid-30s. Into the late 30s. The Reaper's coming. Okay. Thanks for listening. And I will talk to you soon. Have a great Easter if you're into that. I'm not devout, but I like eating garbage and chocolate and doing all that stuff. My little 4-year-old is going to find some eggs from the Easter Bunny and a few other things. So enjoy that if you're into it. Otherwise, I'll see you soon.